Welcome everyone to this session about moving customers to the cloud. Let's start with a quick introduction of the speakers. Esteban, do you want to start?
Yes, sure. Hello, my name is Esteban. I work as a software engineer at Microsoft in Business Central. And I work mostly with cloud services, everything about managing your environments in the cloud, making sure we create all the appropriate infrastructure, and many of the things you will see here today.
Roman?
Yes, hello, my name is Roman. I'm the engineering lead of that team.
And my name is Christian, and I'm an architect in the Business Central team, and I work on many things, but I'm very passionate about cloud in general. So now you know us, and we also want to know you, or we actually have some expectations of you, because we designed this presentation with a specific audience in mind. So we expect that many of you are resellers, VARs, of Business Central or NAV, and that you have many customers on-prem, and that you have an interest in moving those customers to the cloud. So we hope that that's the reason that you are here. So our goal today is quite simple: to convince you that the cloud is ready for you and for your customers. And we're not going to pretend that everything is perfect in the cloud, because we know it isn't. We have work to do, and there are some limitations that means that the cloud is not ready for everyone. But we do believe that it is ready for a vast majority of customers already today. The way we're going to convince you of this is by showing you basically how you can take a customer and move him or her to the cloud and manage them there after you've done it. And after you've seen that, we of course let you make the final decision to determine whether you are ready or not. The rest of the presentation will be divided into 4 parts. Number 1 is about migrating your customizations to the cloud, meaning your code, making it cloud ready. The second part is about moving the customer data, the databases, to the cloud. And the third section is about how we manage your customers once they have been moved to the cloud. And finally, we'll talk about how you can deal with scale as you get more and more customers in the cloud. So let's get started. And I want to start with a high-level view of what it takes to move a customer to the cloud. So here we have an example where we have an installation of NAV 2018 as an example on-prem, which we want to move to the cloud. So we have a database that has all the customer data in it, and we have an application, and it is written in CAL, probably heavily customized, and maybe you also have some AL in there already. And our end goal is to get it into the cloud. And in the cloud, we are running Business Central version 15, or BC 15, as I'll just call it from now on, which was the version we released in October. So in the cloud, if you are in the cloud, you also have a database with the data, just like on-prem. The application is different, however, because as you know, in the cloud, or on BC 15, everything is AL now, no CAL. And it also means that everything is an app or an extension. So what you will always have in the cloud is the Microsoft system application and base application. You might have 0, 1 or more app source apps installed, and you will probably also have a per-tenant extension with the changes that are specific to that specific customer. And a word about terminology. So we sometimes say extension or app or application, but it all means the same thing on a technical level at least. So you might hear us say different things, but just think they are the same. App, extension, doesn't matter. So this is our end goal. Now how do we take our on-prem customer and move them to the cloud? Well, I find it most useful to think about the data first. So if we look at the database in the cloud, it has a schema. It has tables and it has columns. And what determines those tables? Well, it is determined by the apps that you have installed on that environment. So the system app defines some tables. They end up being physical tables in the database. The base app defines some tables, and they also end up being tables in the actual database. Similarly with app source and with the PTE, they might define tables or table extensions, and they end up being tables in the physical database. That's no news. So the cloud schema is determined by the applications that you install. The database on-prem, however, has a different schema. It is just different in a number of ways. Let's call it the old schema because it is the one we're moving away from. And it's difficult for us to move that data to the cloud because the schemas are so different. So what we have to do is have a middle step where the data is in a format that is very, very similar to what we have in the cloud. So we need to convert our on-prem data to a format that is ready for the cloud. So this database in the middle, how do we get the schema to be that way? Well, as I said before, the schema is defined by the apps that you install on your tenant. So what you need to do basically is to recreate, once it's in that state, we can migrate it to the cloud. The way to get it into that state is to install the exact same apps on-prem as you have in the cloud. So you have the base app, you need to get the base app 15 system app from Microsoft. If you have a need for ISV solutions, you need to get the apps from them, and then you can design your PC as well on-prem. Once you have done that and installed those, the schemas will be identical. And now we are in a good position to migrate the data. Now, in order to go from NAV 2018 to this BC15, we need to do an upgrade. And not only that, we also need to refactor our code to be pure extensions. So no code customizations of the base app anymore. This is the overall process for getting from on-prem to the cloud. What I'm going to talk about now is the big red arrow about upgrading from NAV 2018, for example, to BC15. And after that, Esteban will talk about the actual data migration. So at a very high level, this was covered yesterday in 2 sessions. So I'm not going to go into details about how to do it. But at a very high level, what we recommend is the following. First, while you're still on NAV 2018, refactor as much as you can to extract your customizations into separate objects, leaving the customized objects that you do have as close to the originals as possible, because that just sets you up for an easier time when it's time to finally extract them fully to become a pure extension. Then you perform the actual upgrade to BC15, and that involves, among other things, a conversion to AL code, as well as the data upgrade. Now that you are on BC15, you can do the final extractions utilizing events and the other extensibility mechanisms that we have, and to extract those from the base application to become a pure extension. So I'm going to not exactly demo that because I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to show and illustrate what it is that you need to do. So here I have a NAV 2018 installation, and I have customized it. And you can see I have customized the customer table here. Let me just zoom in on my changes. So it is not a huge customization. I'm sure you have more customizations than this one. And you can see that I have customized the customer table. I've added a field and changed some code. I've also customized the customer card page to add a field, and I have also added 3 more objects. This is a reward customization, so that for each customer I can assign a reward level that determines how much discount they get. So as I said before, the first task is to refactor as much as we can away from these objects 18 and 21 and into separate objects to set us up for a successful upgrade. So let's switch to the end result, simply because I'm not going to do it. Now I have an extension here which has my 3 objects as before, and I haven't modified or customized anything anymore because I've extracted that as extension. So here I have a table extension instead of the customization, and I have a customer card extension instead of my page extension before. So I've done all this work. I know I'm cheating a little bit here, or very much, but this is the end result. And now let's install that locally. I'm going to press F5 to have it published to my local environment. And I'd just like to show you the functionality that we added. So let's go into a customer. Let's go into a Datum corporation. And you can see that we added a field reward ID. And I can assign bronze, gold, or silver. But I just want to make a few data changes just to illustrate that these changes, we want those changes that I'm making now to end up in the cloud afterwards. So let's make a few more changes here. Go to the rewards setup page. Let's add a new level. And they'll get 30% discount. And let's assign that level to a Datum corporation, like that. So actually, by now, I have moved to the middle state, as I showed you before. So I'm now in a good position to upgrade, because I have done all that work. There's no rush, though. I don't need to rush into upgrading. I can actually stay on this in this state for as long as I like weeks or months. The customer can run like this just fine. But since we are interested in moving to the cloud, I'm going to take the next step and prepare for that. So in my local environment, I have installed my app now, my rewards app. I need to install the same app in the cloud because, as I said, we need to install the same apps in those two places. So I'm now going to move to my cloud environment. And you can see I'm in Business Central SaaS, and I have a production environment here. And I would like to install the extension there. So I'm going to go to the extensions page and upload my extension. And now I need to find the path. Where did I put it? Here. And paste. And now I will upload it, publish it, and install it. And this will take up to a minute. I don't think I want to wait for that. So at this point, I want to move back to the presentation and basically say that my part is done, even though I cheated a lot. So I've now executed on the big red arrow. I have a BC15 where I have all the right apps installed. I have my data in a database. And I have also installed the PTE in my cloud environment. So now I'm actually ready to do the migration. At this point, all we really care about on-prem is the database. The migration to the cloud is a database-to-database operation. And I'm going to hand it over to Esteban, who will now explain that process.
Thank you, Christian. Right, so the hard part is basically done. All that's left now is smooth sailing with migrating your data. Nothing can go wrong there, obviously. So before we get started, and we're going to do this together, just some requirements that I should mention in case you want to try this as well. First of all, on your cloud environment, you need to make sure that you have the intelligent cloud-based extension installed. This is installed by default on all new environments you create in BC Cloud. So if you didn't remove it, you have it. And the user that performs the setup that we will perform here must have super permissions. That's also a requirement. Now, in terms of your on-premises environment, like Christian already mentioned, you must be on BC 15. Your tenant database compatibility level must be at least 130, which means you're running SQL Server 2016 or later. And we only support database sizes lower than 150 gigabytes for now, although it is highly recommended that if you move to the cloud, that you keep your databases there under 80 gigabytes. So for this demo, we're of course going to use a very small database, so none of this is an issue. Now, the first step is what Christian already mentioned. It is about verifying your extensions. Make sure that everything is installed in the cloud the same as it is installed on premise for all the apps you want to migrate. The data that gets migrated is determined by the extensions that you install in the cloud. If you have any extensions remaining on premises that you didn't install, that data will not move with you. And also, if you have some things installed in the cloud that aren't installed on premises, you will see warnings saying that certain tables weren't migrated from on premises, and we'll see how that looks like. Also, when migrating data, if you have some tables that you don't want the data to migrate, then you can set the replicate data property to false in your AL code, and then that will indicate that to us that you don't want to move any data from that table, and we won't. Now, once you've done that, we actually have a very handy wizard, and all you have to do is follow a few simple steps, and we will set up a connection of sorts between your cloud environment and your on-premises environment. The high-level steps here are you need to provide the SQL connection information to your on-premises database. This does not have to be accessible from the outside. It could point to a server in localhost, for example, but you still need to provide the connection string. You need to configure a self-hosted integration runtime. I'll explain more about how this works in a bit, but if it's the first time you're doing it, it will look something like this. You will reach a page in the wizard with a link to download and install this integration runtime, and you will also be provided with an authentication key. Once you install the wizard, the first time it starts, it will prompt you to enter the authentication key. So you just enter it there, press register, that's it. You have it running. Additionally to that, you could, if you have tried this before, you might already have such an integration runtime running. You can just use an existing one that you have configured in the past. Once you've done that and we are able to successfully connect to your database, you will then be prompted to select what companies you want to migrate. You don't need to migrate all the companies necessarily. And you can set a schedule if you want optionally to replicate the data, be it daily or weekly, and we'll see how to do that. Now, why don't we try it out? Good. So, I am in the same cloud environment Christian was using. If I go to setup and extensions and go to assisted setup, you will see that actually the first option I have here is to set up cloud migration. So I'll just start this wizard. Here, yes, privacy notice, accept some terms, then select the product you're migrating from. In our case, it's Business Central to Business Central, so we'll pick this. And now here, in most cases, we are assuming that you are running on-premises, so it's an on-premises SQL server. We will provide the connection string. I have mine stored securely in this text file. And in my case, because I have already done this in the past, I have an integration runtime installed, so I'll just reuse that one. Once you have done the same, you'll see that you will get this integration runtime configuration manager, and this part that says integration runtime, that's the name that you are supposed to enter. I have it in this text file as well. And I'll just enter that name and click next. Now, this process of setting up the connection can take about 2 or 3 minutes. So in the meantime, I'll explain to you what's going on. This is our starting point, right? You have some on-premise database server or servers, and you have a database somewhere in the Business Central cloud that represents your cloud environment. What happens when you actually want to run migration from on-premises to the cloud is that our service will use an Azure service called Azure Data Factory. Amongst other things, Azure Data Factory is an orchestration service for data movement that can move large amounts of data from various types of sources to various types of destinations. Azure Data Factory is the one that then communicates with the integration runtime that you have installed on premises to tell it what to do and to orchestrate the moving of this data. However, we cannot expect everyone to be happy with services talking into their on-premises servers. Many organizations also would just not allow that for security reasons. So that's not really what happens here. What happens here is in every stage of the migration pipeline, Azure Data Factory would just put the next set of instructions into a queue that the integration runtime is listening on from time to time. So it is actually your integration runtime that is just checking if there's new work to do, and nothing is calling into your servers. Now, because you have provided the connection string, this connection string is sent to the integration runtime to talk to your on-premises tenant database, to prepare the data, and to then finally send it over. By prepare the data, I mean it will run some stored procedures, copy some data to some extra tables, and then write that back. and then Azure Data Factory will just write that back directly into your on-premises database. Some important points to note here. All of this is very secure. We take security very seriously. Everything is encrypted when it goes over the wire. The credentials that are passed down to talk to your database are safely encrypted as well using a Windows secure encryption interface. And we don't modify your on-premises data. Although we do need to create some tables and run some procedures in your database to prepare the data, all your existing tables and fields and data are not touched. And also, the data that we move is purely SQL to SQL. We are not storing a copy of this data anywhere else. It is moved from your on-premises database to your cloud database. Another interesting point here is that because you can reuse this integration runtime, it allows us to actually do this for multiple databases in the same server. You only need to install the integration runtime once, and you can move various customers that you have, if you have them on the same database server in some on-premise machine, to the cloud without following that first step again. The way you do that is what I did, and I showed you here, is you just enter the integration runtime name in the wizard. Now, let's go back to our wizard. Good. It has successfully created the pipeline that will be used. And it's now showing me a list of my on-premises companies. And I can select which companies I want to migrate. I will migrate this Contoso MIG company. And then I can also set a schedule if I want the migration to run recurringly. But I'm not going to do this right now. So that's it. We've set up the connection. The way you now manage this is by accessing a page that we call Cloud Migration Management. In this page, you can do various tasks related to data migration. I'm going to just start by running a migration right now, because this initial migration takes about 5 to 7 minutes, and so I can get a head start on that while I explain a few other things. Every time you run this, it will take a few seconds because it needs to verify that your database, that it can still communicate with your database, that the Azure Data Factory instance is reachable, but then you can just continue doing other things. This will run in the background. So let's talk about a few important things related to this page and to managing the migration. Running migrations, yes. You can run migrations on demand, like I just did. You just click the Run Migration button, and it will perform a migration at that point. Or you can set a schedule, like the wizard offered you to, which can be daily or weekly. You determine when and at what time. We do recommend that when you run a migration, you do it outside of business hours, when your system on premises is not being used. That's just a general recommendation. The first run, which is the run I'm doing right now, will migrate all of your existing on-premises data. We don't have any of that data in the cloud yet. However, subsequent runs, for example, if you've set up a schedule, they will only migrate the data that has changed since the last time that we replicated the data by using SQL change tracking, which also saves a lot of time if you have larger databases. If something happens and you just wanted to just migrate all of the data again, you can always reset the status via the Reset Cloud Data action in the management page, and that will cause the next migration that runs to be a full run where all the data gets copied over again. Some very important points here. When we are migrating the data from on-premises to the cloud, we will delete data in the cloud that you have. You should not be using the cloud environment while you're doing these things as any sort of production environment. You should not be writing or updating records, because it's a point where we are just trying to move your data, and you should not change it, because then it will be out of sync with the on-premises data. All your business processes, of course, during this period must be still done on premises. And once you are ready to fully move, after you've tested it and if you're happy with it, remember to also disable the cloud migration setup, which you can perform via an action, because that will make sure to delete the pipeline from Azure Data Factory, and there will be no opportunity for data being moved by accident. Now, while we do move most of your data, there are some things that we don't move over. One of those are your users and your permissions. The reasons for this is because in the cloud we only support using Azure Active Directory authentication, and it must be configured to the Active Directory tenant your environment belongs to, while on premises you might have any kind of setup. You might be using Windows authentication, you might be using NAV user password authentication, so your users are just not migrated at all. Neither are your permission sets, although you can add permission sets to your extensions, and that's a valid way to move them, but if you have any custom user-defined permission sets or anything, you will have to recreate those. All your non-super cloud users, for example, users that aren't the one that is running the setup, they will, after you've run it, will be assigned the intelligent cloud permission set, and they will be assigned to the intelligent cloud user group. And this will revoke any write access they have in the cloud environment, but it will give them read access to everything. This is also to prevent people, again, from making changes in the cloud while you're still moving your data over. You can, if you want to restrict their read access further, because at this point they could read everything, you can just copy this intelligent cloud permission set and remove some permissions that you want users not to have. Any actions and action groups that those users might have had access to when they had write permissions will just not be visible to them if they log into the cloud environment, instead of just getting a bunch of errors. Good. So before we talk about the next topic, let me just check if this is completed. Good. So let's switch over. Now you see my full run has completed. It took about 4 minutes. And if I look at this migration information, for example, you can see some statistics. It migrated data from 273 tables successfully. There are some tables that are not migrated, which I mentioned before, that you'll see warnings for. These are mostly tables that, for example, other extensions I have installed have decided that they don't want to migrate that data, or some user and permission related tables. You can have a look at this at any point. So let's have a look into our company now. I'll just switch over to the company that we just migrated. Good. And let's go to our customer list and see if, the data that we expect is actually there. Yeah, it is. So our Adatum Corporation is a Platinum member, and Platinum, which is a table change Christian had made before, also migrated over. So let's try one of these subsequent migrations that should take less time and only migrate changes. I'll just start it again, and then we will continue. Good. Now, let's talk about another issue you might encounter. It is not uncommon for you to have tables like the following, right? You have, let's say, an orders table, and you want to make a reference to one of your users. For example, you reference the username in the users table as saying, hey, this user created this order. Well, it is not a given that that user in the cloud will have the same username, because the username in the cloud would be determined by their authentication email. So someone that was John Doe on premises might be J Doe now. And therefore, once your data is moved over, these references don't work anymore. For this, we have a handy action that allows you to define user mappings, where you basically just say, actually, on-premises John Doe is cloud J Doe. And all this does is very simple. It will rename your cloud user to match the username of the on-premise user, and then that will restore that relationship for you. There's various other actions that we can have a look at as well in the page. So, for example, here is the user mappings. This shows me my on-premises user. I could just then go ahead and pick up my cloud users, press OK, and it would just rename the cloud users. If you prefer, this actually does the same thing as renaming a user in the user's card page. So if you just want to go to your users list and manually rename your cloud users, that's perfectly fine, and that would also do the trick. There are some other handy actions. For example, you can reset your runtime services key. That's the authentication key you had to configure in the beginning in case you think it's been compromised. You can get it again if you uninstalled the integration runtime for some reason and want to install it again. You can change the companies that you migrated. Let's say you started with a test company, it worked fine, now you want to add an additional company. And there's this handy checklist as well. And this checklist will kind of tell you the steps that you should be doing during a migration, and you can dive into it and make sure that you've done everything and you're not forgetting something. And at this point, we haven't tested anything, and I know it can be maybe a bit odd to tell you don't write any data, right? Don't perform any non-read action in the cloud while you're migrating, because you of course want to test that things work. And for this, what we recommend is testing in a sandbox environment. We allow you to create a copy of any production environment you have into a sandbox environment. It will have the same data the production environment had at the point that you made the copy, and there you can just test everything, assign write permissions to your user, execute all your actions, and your production environment and its data will be unaffected. When you create this copy, the data replication is also no longer connected to the sandbox, so then there's no problem of that test data being overwritten, and that's we think a good way that you can verify that everything's working. And I think these are the high-level steps that you need to perform. You saw it doesn't take very long. Of course, my data was rather small, but it's very simple to get started. And I also wasn't migrating a production customer right now. You can really just have some test environment with some data connected in your cloud environment, see if it works for you. It's very simple. With that, I'll hand it over to Roman now to show you how to manage your customers in the cloud.
Good. So you have brought your environments into the cloud. And now, how do you manage these environments in the cloud? So in the next couple of minutes, I'll walk through the different management operations, some telemetry, and support options, how this can be done in the cloud. So for this, we have created the admin center. Let me show you. So, in the Business Central Admin Center, which you can reach under businesscentral.dynamics.com/ and then it's the AAD tenant ID /admin. Here you can see all your environments, so production environments, sandbox environments, which version they are running in, which country or localization they're running, so what type it is, and also the direct link to the application. What we see here, the first one is the production environment. That's the one that we have been syncing over. And so let's follow up on what Esteban has said, how to do a copy of that environment. We can create new environments and delete environments here. Oh, let me just refresh this. So we can create and delete environments here. And in this case, I want to take a copy of our production environment. So I'll say it's going to be a sandbox. We say copy from production environment. The country is going to be US, and we can see the version that is pre-selected. It's basically the same version as the source. Let me put a name here, so we call it sandbox copy, and start this. So this will run for a couple of minutes. It will create a copy of the environment into a sandbox. While this is running, let me go back to the presentation. So we have the admin center for you to create and delete environments. You can work with production and sandboxes. You can copy your production environments to a sandbox. And what we have enabled with the last release as well is the possibility to have environments in multiple countries. So in our case, our Contoso tenant has environments in the US, but if they, let's say, want to open a chocolate selling business in Belgium, they could go to the admin center and create a new production environment for Belgium as well, which would then have all the regional customizations or localization. Yeah. So one of the first things then we will be doing is to set up notification recipients. This is a possibility for you to get notified if something in your environment is going to happen or happened. These are at the moment email notifications, for example, when the environment is scheduled for an update, if that schedule date has changed, if the update succeeded, or in case it failed, and then there will be some explanation of why it failed, some reasons. And also there will be a notification sent if there are any PTEs, so per tenant extensions, that would not work in a new version and where the compilation fails. Another important aspect of these environments in the cloud is we need to set the update window. And the update window is essentially a maintenance window that you can set for your environments, where then Microsoft will do all maintenance operations outside of business hours in this update window. So let's set this up. I go back to the admin center. The first thing we'll set up the notification recipients. You can see this here. We see Christian is already registered. Let me add myself. So I will get notified now if there's a new update available, or any of the other notifications will be sent. Then we also want to set the update window. So we go, for example, for our production environment. I'll select it, and then on that details screen we can see a bit more information about the environment. Let me scroll down. So we can see here that there's no update window set. And we can do that. So I'll set the update window. And you can see here this is a local time. If we want to do that in the night, let's say between 10 and 4 o'clock in the morning, then we will ensure that any security updates or patching will happen inside that update window to not disturb the business operations. So I'll save that. Good. So we have the notification recipient set and the update window. And let's go fast forward a little bit, a couple of months into the future, and we have a new version available. As we have the notifications set up, you will get a nice email notification, a bit like this one. It will say, hey, your Business Central is about to get more exciting. And you can see the date when the update is scheduled. You can see the time. you can see which environment is affected and from what version to what version it will be updated. What this email also says is if that date and time is inconvenient, you can reschedule based on your convenience. So in this case, we see that's the 24th of November. And I believe that's this weekend, right? It's Sunday. So that's very inconvenient. I think you wanted to do some beer tasting and more sightseeing here in Belgium, right? So let's change that date. I go back to the admin center, go to my environments, and in this case, it also tells me already so that there's a new update version available. Updates will begin, and we actually have a 2-week window in this case where we can pick an update date. So if I go to update and say schedule, and we can see, so current version, and it allows me to pick a date. So the earliest date is here the 23rd, and we have a time frame of about 2 weeks until next Sunday. So let me pick next weekend, Saturday next weekend, and I say let's schedule that. So what we'll do behind the scenes is to mark that environment for update on that day, and it will run in the maintenance window, in the update window during the night. So now you might be thinking, this is all nice, but what about troubleshooting? So what if the environment that is running in the cloud has some problems? How do you investigate? I mean, you have very little control there. But we have a few possibilities for you to investigate. So the first one I want to mention is application insights. This is a really cool feature. It's actually part of Azure Monitor, so it's not a Business Central specific capability. It's part of Azure, and it's a very powerful monitoring and telemetry solution. It provides monitoring, alerting, analytics tools. You can write fancy queries, and it's really a great tool to diagnose issues and see and understand what users are doing with your app. So how do you set that up? We go again to the admin center, start from the environments, and what is nice here, what I want to emphasize, it's your application insights account that this will be emitted to. So we can go to our environment, let's pick our production environment, and we have here at the moment we see that there's no key set. Right? So then I can say here, set an application insights key, enable it, and now we need an instrumentation key. So where do we get this from? So I have created an application insights account before. Let me just refresh. The instrumentation key is here. I'll just copy it out and put it here. Good. So now, while this key is applied and set, so there needs to be a little restart done of the environment because that information is set as a parameter during startup of the environment. So I want to quickly give a little disclaimer. So at the moment, this application insights integration is in beta mode, in preview, and we provide information about long-running queries into the telemetry at the moment. So a long-running query is configurable, but at the moment it's set to any query that is longer than 1 second. And we are going to add more and more events and telemetry into that channel, into application insights. So we started with these long-running queries, but we have discussions about, for example, providing information about report runtime or SOAP calls, OData calls, how long those take, general errors information, or also job queue telemetry. So we will be continuously adding features and functionality that we find is useful for you to investigate. So let's have a look at our application insights account. I want to show you 2 very cool things. So this is set. Yes, we have the key set. The environment is back active. Let me go to my app insights. So 2 features that I think are very useful at the moment in our context is a search. So as I said, we show long-running queries, and we can do a simple search here. So if I search for SQL, any trace event related to SQL in the last 24 hours, we actually get some long-running queries here. What is nice, you can then drill down in more detail and see, yeah, this is a warning. We see that the action took longer than the given threshold, and we can look even in more detail. Let me make this a bit bigger. So we have these trace properties. We can see when this event happened, what happened, and we also see, and I think this is the really cool part, what SQL statement was executed that took so much time and where this one came from. So we have the AL stack trace here. We can see this was a page extension, app object ID 50,100, and some extension from customer list, an action that was triggered. And you see also who created that extension. So in this case, it was me. And I'll show you how we can look into that a little bit in more detail. So we also see, I think that's also relevant, which environment and what environment type that trace came from. And so from here, this is a very good way to investigate performance issues. Yeah. So I said there's 2 interesting ways to look at the data. One is the search. I have also set up an alert because you maybe don't want to look every day and do a query and search. There's very powerful alerting capabilities where you can set up your own custom rules that trigger alerts then, and you can also have different ways to react to those alerts. In my case here, I have set up a simple email notification that will send me an email if a certain number of these slow queries occurs in a given time frame. And then you actually have an overview like this, where you can see, you can actually set the own severity that you want, and you see how many alerts and when these alerts were triggered. And from here we can also drill down. Yeah. So we have multiple of these events that were triggered in the last 24 hours. So one of the other cool things I think we can do here is, if I look at my extension. So this is the slow extension that I wrote. We can put a breakpoint and see what is going on. So let me say, I put a breakpoint here, and this extension is running in my sandbox environment. If I press Ctrl-Shift-P, I get the command palette here, and I can debug without publishing. So let me try that. So this is opening the sandbox environment in the cloud. We're logging in, and we're on the customer list page. So I know this button will trigger my functionality. So let me try. And we can see already here the window is flashing. The breakpoint is triggered. So I think this is pretty cool. We can debug in the cloud and take advantage of all the cool functionality that the Visual Studio Code has. So I can just, let me go through these lines here. And you can also take advantage of the information that we get, for example, on database calls and drill down and see basically what is going on. So I think this is really cool. One disclaimer also I have here, it works only in sandboxes. Yeah, and if I go back, let's go back to my presentation. So if we look at troubleshooting, at the moment you get information about long-running queries with information about the context and details. You can set up flexible alerts in your application insights account, and you can debug your apps in sandboxes in the cloud. So what if all that didn't help? And you may want to do some offline troubleshooting. So we have also, with the last release in October, enabled the functionality to export your production databases into a storage account. So this would allow you to, for example, take a backup on a regular basis, or take that backpack and put it on an on-premise installation and run it there. Or you can do essentially whatever you want with the data. It basically means you're not locked in the cloud. This is one of the top asks from you, from our partners, and this is possible now. So, actually I have a t-shirt here. Where would you go now to do a database export? Anybody?
Panel and select the environment that I want to.
Correct, yes, to the admin center, yes. So I go to the admin center, and yes, you paid attention, we actually have a database button here, and we can create a database export. So this is our production environment that we brought in through the migration. We synced it, and we want to take it out again. So here I have the possibility to create this database export. It proposes me a file name, so this is going to be a backpack, and a container name. So what I need now is the location where to put that database export in a blob storage. So if you click here, actually there's going to be some explanation of how to get that. Let me show you. Just need to find the right window. Here we go. Yes. So I have a storage account created here. And what we need is a SAS token, so a shared access signature token. We basically need access for the blob and file. Disable a couple of here. One thing that is important to know, for big databases, that operation to copy the entire database out into the blob storage can take a couple of hours. So make sure to produce a token that is valid long enough for the operation to complete. So in this case, that is going to be enough time. And let me generate this token. So this will give me this blob services SAS URL. I'll copy this over. go back to the admin center. Oops, paste it here. And let's go. Yeah, so this queued up the export request that will run for a couple of minutes, and it will show up then in the storage account. Yeah, so this is actually a run that I have done before, earlier this morning. The other one will also show up here in a couple of minutes. Yeah. Now, if your customer needs help, so let's say they're in the cloud, you have your environment in the cloud. If your customer needs help, we have the possibility to set your contact information in the admin center, and then it will show up on the help and support page in the application. So I think this is a very nice way to give that first level of support to your users. So we can also do that if I go again to the admin center, and we have a section support here. So I say manage support contact, and let's put myself here. And save. So now if I go back to our production environment, and here under help and support, you can see the version that is running, and yes, we see if the users need technical support, they can contact me here at my email address with some more context information on what is a tenant and so on. And then basically it's a possibility for you to help directly your users. So this is if your customers need help. What if you need help? What do you do then? So one of the things we have also enabled in the admin center is the possibility to create a support request directly from the admin center. And we have a functionality that we call the red button. So first, if you need help, we can have a possibility here to create a support ticket. This will bring us to the Power Platform admin center, where we can directly create a support request that will go to our support team. So this is again here, so on the top right corner, new support request. And then finally the red button. So the red button is basically a direct line to our engineers. If there's an outage, a serious problem with the tenant, for example, if no user can log in, or you cannot access any API, or the web services are not working. So this is really for the disaster outage situation. You can create here a report of a production outage, and we will get information about the environment and all the context details. Put your contact information, and somebody from Microsoft will reach out to you. So now this button should be used with care, responsibly, because that means actually that an engineer will wake up if that happens during the night. Of course, we will do everything to prevent these things from happening, but sometimes it does. So we want you to know that there's somebody always there that you can reach out for help. So I think this is a quite great set of functionality that we have to manage your environments in the cloud. We have possibilities to provide help, to create a backup, and I'm actually quite excited to have you try this out.
Yep. So is this on? Can you turn this on? Yes, thank you. So Roman walked through all the management capabilities that we have in the cloud that enables you to manage your customer after you've moved them. So what happens when you scale? Because that's actually the thing that happens when you're in the cloud. The cloud business model is different. And what we often see is that customers are smaller, they require less customizations in the cloud, the implementations are quicker, so the deals get smaller. On the other hand, you are going to get more deals. So you're going to get many customers. What happens when you go from 1 customer to 10 customers to hundreds of customers perhaps? Furthermore, each customer can have multiple environments because we just saw how easy it is to create multiple environments. So it kind of explodes the number of things that you have to manage. So the question is, how do we handle it when this scale hits? It's a positive problem after all, but how do we handle it? So the answer, of course, is automation. And you will be pleased to learn that whatever Roman just demonstrated in the admin center can be done programmatically without any exceptions. And I'm going to give a little demo of that. So I have written just a small piece of PowerShell code here, and I'm going to run it. Get the access token that allows me to authenticate to the admin center. So I just picked 2 more or less random examples that you can do. So the first one I'm going to call is just give me just a get operation to give me all the environments. The environments of who? Which customer? Well, the access token that I'm passing in for the authorization header tells Business Central who I am. So it knows the customer. So it's going to give me my environments back. So let's call it. And now we have the result back. You can see we have a response that contains some JSON if you're quick in the content field. Let's format that a little bit nicer. And let's print it out. So now we see it. We see the list of environments. There should be 4 because that's what we saw in the UI. And you can see that they have all the information that we expect, like the application insights key that Roman said before, the environment name, the country code, the version, the URLs, the data center that it was person into, and this version of the platform. And you can also see the database size, all these things that you can see in the UI as well. So as another example, more or less random, let's invoke the database export operation using an API. So in this case, it's a post operation, and I'm going to invoke it on the export, and I want the production environment to be exported into a backpack. Well, where should it put it? Well, I provide the 3 values that Roman also had to provide in the UI. So it's quite similar. Let me run it. And now it has started the operation. We could go and check the history and see that it actually did execute on that. So these were just 2 examples. I'll leave it to your imagination to decide what you want to do with it. Maybe you want to have periodic backups of your database, of your environments, or you want to make sure they all have the same App Insights keys, or however you want to do it, right? So the APIs are well documented. So if you go to your favorite search engine and search for Business Central Admin Center API, this will be your first hit. And so I've included a screenshot here where I show the database export operation, and you will recognize it is exactly that URL that I invoked before, and it is exactly the three JSON properties that I provided, so everything is straightforward to use. So you can do a lot of things in the Admin Center API, and I demonstrated 2 of the things. There's also another scenario that I think is very important, and that is automated deployment. As you make changes to the extensions for your customers, you want to upload them to your customers' environments. And you can do this manually, as I did in the beginning, but it's a pain, right? It's slow, you make mistakes, you need to do it for multiple environments for that customer, so it would be nice if we can automate that piece as well. So what the setup that we recommend to you is to do this in Azure DevOps. You've probably seen some sessions on that as well. It's very popular, and for good reason. It's really, really nice. So what we recommend is that if you have an extension, you have your source code in a Git repo in Azure DevOps. And you set up an automated build pipeline that builds your app, runs your unit tests, and now you end up with a .app file that is ready for deployment. Now you want to deploy it to the customer. You probably don't want to deploy it directly to the production environment, as I did initially here, because what if the app has some bugs, or what if the functionality is not exactly like the customer wants it to be? So for that reason, we recommend you to deploy to another environment, probably a sandbox environment. So we have created an environment called UAT, User Acceptance Test, which we want to deploy to first. And then we invite the customer to go and test out the functionality. If the customer is happy, well, then we're just gonna invoke a similar deployment, but this time to the production environment. And at that point, of course, the customer can use the functionality for real. So let me show you how that works. So I have my Azure DevOps, where am I? Over here. My Azure DevOps account on TotalMig. So I'm the partner in this case, and I have the code for the customer in a repo. You can see that I have a repo called console.mig, and it has all my source code, as you saw in VS Code as well. And I have set up a build pipeline that takes that source code, as I said, builds the apps, run the unit test, and produces the resulting app file. And you can see that if you go into one of these, you can see that it has produced an artifact. If it works, let me refresh. It's produced an artifact. There it is. And inside of it, it has my app file. Right? This is the one we would like to deploy now. So I'm not going to demonstrate the build process. There are different ways to do this. Probably you want to do it with a Docker container underneath, and there are many partners that can help you with doing that by this time. So I also have defined a release pipeline that can take my artifact, including the .app file, and deploy it to the customer's environments. And let's create a new release. So I want to select this version 1.30 and deploy that to my customer. Create. And now it has created a new release. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Oops. Let's look at that release. So the way I have designed this release pipeline is the way that I explained before. First, I want to deploy it to the UAT environment. When that is completed and the customer has validated my changes, I want to deploy to my production. I have configured an approval step here, which means that the pipeline will stop at this point, waiting for somebody to approve the deployment to the production environment. We can look at the logs to see what it's doing. Perhaps at some point. While we wait for that, maybe we can go to the admin center and actually log into the UAT environment. There it is. Let me log into it. Okay, let's see how far we are in the deployment. So it is currently in progress with the upload and installation. So anytime now, should be able to see it on the extensions page. Somewhere among all these apps. I don't think I want to wait for it, but it typically takes maybe 30 seconds. It's here anytime now. Yeah, let's not wait for that. So this is really useful if you have multiple environments for the same customer, and if you have many customers, of course, it will help you greatly as well. So this shows how if you have one customer and you have one app for that customer, how we set it up. As I showed, you put the source code for that app in its own repo. You create a build pipeline that can produce the app file, and then you create a release pipeline that takes that app file and deploys it to the customer's environments. The question, however, is what do we do when we have multiple customers? How do we sort of scale this setup to multiple customers? And our recommendation is simply to replicate the setup that we have for the single customer. So for every customer, for every app, create a repo, build pipeline, and release pipeline. It's a straightforward approach, and I know some partners are doing this already. And this actually concludes the presentation. Let me just do a quick summary. So we've shown initially how you need to upgrade your code to BC15 and the data as well, and extract customizations from the base app into pure extensions. Then Esteban demonstrated how you can migrate your data to a cloud environment, including things like setting up users and permissions. And he also talked about how you can test when you are in the cloud to see that it is migrated properly by copying to a sandbox environment. And Roman went through, I won't enumerate all these, but went through all of the management capabilities that we now have in the admin center. And finally, I talked a little bit about how we can handle scale. And with that, it is time for questions. What questions do you have? Yeah. You need to.
Hi. Esteban told that there's a maximum amount of gigabytes for cloud environments. And he also mentioned that below that maximum, 80 gigs is the maximum recommended size. Why is there a maximum in place?
Certain operations become very impractical if your database is too large. There are situations where we might need to restore from a point-in-time backup, for example, if something goes wrong during an upgrade. And if your database is too large, it could take many hours or even days, depending on the size, to restore, which means customer downtime as well, which is why we just don't recommend it, because right now operations, the time certain operations take just increases too much if you have large databases.
Yeah, and what do we do with customers that are a long-time customer of NAV with a large database and we want to move to the cloud?
I think there are three things. Can you get rid of some of the data? That's an option. If it is, then great. You can move to the cloud. If you can't, you can wait, because we expect to increase this limit going forward. We're still growing up in this sense. And number three, if that is not an option for you, you stay on-prem. You give it to the neighbor over there.
Hi. I actually have multiple questions. The first one was if I already have AAD in my on-premise installation, do I still have to assign all the users again?
They will probably have the same username as you have in the cloud in that case, and so it means that the mapping is kind of not necessary because they have the right names.
Yes, but the users will not migrate, so you do still need to assign permissions to the right users and things like that. It doesn't matter if you already have it set up on-prem in that regard.
Okay. The next question was, am I able to add custom application insights, telemetry initializers? So as an extension, for example, I want to add my custom.
Your custom telemetry from your extension. At this point, no. So as Roman mentioned, we are going to add platform level telemetry for reports, for web service calls, and a number of other places. Errors in particular is also interesting. What we're also looking at is allowing you from AL code to write a message that will end up again in the same place in your app insights key. That's another important scenario that we are looking at.
Yeah, that will be very helpful for custom APIs and
absolutely
things like that. The last thing was dependencies for multiple partners. So you mentioned if I, as one partner, have multiple customers with multiple apps, but how do I handle it if I have an app and another partner has another app that depends on my app and I want to upgrade my app? How do I handle this? And I don't know about the app.
That's a complicated scenario. It's not because we're not thinking about it. I just don't. I'm not able to describe the process easily at this to you right here. So, but come and talk to us afterwards. What if you have a hotfix to your app? If it's in the middle of a dependency change, you will be able to hot swap it, kind of. But then there's also the case where you change your API, perhaps in a way that invalidates the extension on top, and the process for that is different. I can tell you that our general approach here is that we want it to be a pull model from the customer side. So if you make changes to apps in App Source, they should not go to customers automatically. Ideally, we want customers to pull. And when they pull, we will be able to see whether it will work or not, whether they can compile, and they may need to take multiple simultaneous new versions of apps. But it's an area that we still have to explore further.
Okay. Thank you.
You're only going to get one T-shirt, even though we have multiple questions. What's over there? Can you throw it?
I have 2 or 3. Can I script my sandbox creation?
Absolutely.
You showed us create a backpack, but I didn't know if you could also create a sandbox from a script.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, you can definitely create the sandbox environments from a script.
Can you expose the created by and date of those sandbox environments? Were those, or at least the created date? I have a problem managing my sandboxes at the moment. I have many.
Yeah.
And
You want to know? You want a property that says when they were created.
Yeah. Just
we'll take that into consideration.
And regarding the synchronization from my on-prem 15s, because I want to move to the cloud. You mentioned that in my app I can specify some tags or whatever to say don't sync this data. But are you going to give me an option to say I have a massive changelog entries table? I don't want to sync the changelog entries table. Are you going to give me an option to say don't bother with that, to save some space? This is base app.
No.
No. But you know what?
Sorry, but not all the data is migrated, and we can control it on a base app level. So there are cases where if we find that some data is just not useful at all in the cloud, we might disable it. But again, because it can't be controlled, we have to think about everyone, right? So unless it's something that is really just not useful to anyone, we probably won't disable that.
And with the global application data, just going back to Cal, global tables, when you're doing that sync up and you select your company, what's happening with that global data?
I assume so. Actually, I don't know which of the tables that are not per company that we are synchronizing.
Oh, right.
But you can go and look, if you try it out,
Okay.
you can see exactly which tables got synced and which didn't. So you would have your answer right there.
Thank you.
Yes, you can check the warnings, and then you'll see the tables that didn't have their data migrated.
Yeah, a couple of questions from me. I want to make a copy of the production environment. Can I do any action before that copy will be running? Because my problem is, for example, I have notification entries, so there are some email that should depart. And at the time that that copy goes, those email are there, and the customer will receive 2 emails, one from production and one from my environment. It's a real case. So is there any action I can do?
One thing you can do...
If I was doing it manually, I would run a script to remove some data from SQL.
I don't believe we give you a hook that you can run something on the copy operation. I don't know if it helps, but what you can do is check in your code whether you are in a sandbox environment or in a production environment. And then you can, in general, turn that functionality off in your sandbox. I don't know if that solves your problem, though. Another thing we do when we copy to a sandbox is if you're using HTTP client to make calls out. I don't know if that's the case here, probably isn't. But if you make HTTP calls out, we'll block that. And you have to turn it on again in your sandbox environment.
Mainly the problem is SMTP.
Yeah, I know. It's not HTTP.
Okay, second question is related to the administration panel. Should we give access to the customer?
No, it's typically the admin or the delegated admin that would have access.
Yeah, so the ones that have access to the admin center is either the global administrators in the customer, so the customer actually has access already, and then the delegated admins, which are partners that have a trusted relationship with the customer. One way to think about it, a way that I subscribe to is the customer is in charge at the end of the day. As a customer, they can even kick you out. They can say, I no longer want you as a partner, right? They can do that. And so it is actually they are in charge at the end of the day. So you are invited into their environment. That's how I look at it.
Is there any protection that you cannot delete the production environment? Looking at that list, it's one entry. You click, delete. Do you want delete? Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So no, but if someone were to do it accidentally or otherwise maliciously, we can recover it for a certain amount of time. So unless you're taking a break of a month, not using your environment, and then coming back, we can still recover it.
We keep your data for 35 days.
It is not my data at that time, it's the customer data. But
the customer's data. We keep it for 35 days.
I
after
would consider that one of them should be your default, and you shouldn't be able to touch at all.
No. It's an area we have heard feedback on, that you want to have more fine-grained control of what you can do in the admin center and who will have access to it.
Thank you.
Any other questions over here? It's one up there, sorry.
Yeah, one question regarding the migrations. If a customer has already some data in production in the business central, some live system, wants to migrate some other companies from on-prem, is that a scenario that works, or are there any fallbacks or something? So basically merging two production environments in a way while it's different companies.
Well, if the data is in different companies, then technically you should be able to, because the data gets migrated per company, except for some tables, right, that are shared. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's something we would recommend, but it might be.
Would you recommend them then, or if there is really a client who has something on the cloud, something on-prem, what would be a recommended way of getting this all into one package in the cloud?
So you always have the choice between having two companies in one environment or having two environments in the first place. And definitely if you want the second approach, that is a possibility. So if you don't want them to be in the same environment, if that's okay, then you can have it that way.
Okay, yeah. Thanks.
What's the question over here?
It's working. Okay, so I have a live customer SaaS for about a year now, and we really had problems when one user logged the database and everybody was locked out of the database for 20 minutes, half an hour, on sandbox environment for whole night. So what are the tools to disable the session, kill the session, or how to approach this problem, because we really had it in production?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it is one of the scenarios we want to enable as well. because you might accidentally run a report that runs for hours and consumes a lot of resources, and today you don't have an ability to kill it. And we of course have a full list of all the sessions that are running, and we would like to just expose that to an admin, probably in the admin center, so that you can just kill it at any time. But today, I don't have a good answer.
Maybe follow up. So we also had some issues when the upgrade failed. That's fine, it fails, no problem. But the job queue didn't start again. I would probably need to correct myself. The job queue was started, but the earliest date time was not updated because it was not running. So what to do in that scenario?
Well, if the earliest date wasn't changed, won't it run again?
Well, that's the problem, because if the database wasn't offline, it would run, it would update the job queue. But because the database was offline, it didn't update, and it will never run. The user needs to go to the job queue and check out the job queue entries that are in status ready, but the earliest date time is not after current date time. So it will never run.
Yeah, well, if it didn't run, if that happened, then it's a bug. Yeah. Why don't you come down afterwards and explain? Any more questions? There's one up in the back. Can you?
So we had a customer in the cloud, and after 1 year he decided to cancel the contract because he was not happy. And in Austria we have the law to archive data for 7 years, and we have to access this data every time. So what's the solution for this?
I don't know. You know?
The export now, you could export it and
it's
store
not
it in
enough because we, if the government wants a report, we have to run this report after 7 years again. And the government can choose every report of the system, and we cannot just use the database, so we really need the system running.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, on-prem you could keep the database and you had the code as well, and you would have to have that system running for 7 years, it sounds like. In the cloud, I don't know. I mean, you have the database. As Roman said, you can export the database. In principle, you can migrate it back into a cloud environment at any time and rerun the reports, but that's the best I can do. Okay. Was a question over here? Where's the mic? Let's have that question and one more, and then let's finish.
Hello. You showed in the first part that there are in the on-premise database app source apps installed in it. How could you do that?
You can't download from app source and install on-prem. So if you have app source apps or you have ISV solutions, you would have to talk to the ISV to get those installed, just like today, actually.
Okay.
One last question. There's one all the way up in the back, but you have to come down, I think.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's one here. Last question.
Jim? I think he has the mic.
Okay. Thank you very much for your insight view. About backups, how can customers restore his backup data? For example, your backup in Microsoft Cloud or the downloaded backup. Is there any planned in the future?
So the backup goes into your storage account?
Yes. And it's planned that we can restore any data in the cloud.
You're saying you want to go back from that backup into a
cloud environment.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have that planned. We don't have that plan, and I don't think it will come anytime soon.
Okay, you don't have that planned. Okay.
If you want to get data into the cloud, what we showed today is the way to do it. if you want to take it and install it and get an environment up and running on-prem, it's straightforward. You just take that backpack and restore it into a SQL server, and then you are running.
Okay.
If you do have the extraordinary case though in the cloud where something went really wrong with the customer and they would like to go back like 2 days and they don't mind losing the data for those 2 days, you can contact us and we do have the ability to do that, but I don't believe that's something we are planning on exposing to anyone.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.